Billionaire saw his father crying in the maid's arms. Then she revealed a shocking secret. "Get away from him, you filthy little servant!" Meredith Vass's voice sliced through the silence of the Grand Whitmore estate, sharp and venomous. Outside, the storm clouds raged, thunder crashing in the distance, as if the heavens themselves were warning of the storm within. Inside, the wind howled against the windows, the chandelier lights flickering, casting shadows across the vast marble floors. Elena Brooks, 32, a loyal maid, stood firm yet trembling, her arm wrapped protectively around the frail figure behind her. It was Harold Whitmore, the billionaire patriarch, now 78, his frailty magnified by his illness. Parkinson's had ravaged his body, stealing away his strength and voice, but his eyes, they still burned with memories of a life once filled with power and pride. His steel-blue gaze never left Meredith as she stormed toward them, venom dripping from her every step. Meredith, in her gleaming silk gown, stood tall and cold, a glass of red wine in her hand, eyes burning with disdain. "He's not your father. He's a burden. And you," she spat, glaring at Elena, "you're nothing but a lowly servant, a tool, a piece of furniture. Move!" Elena's voice remained soft but unyielding. "He asked me to stay." Behind her, Harold whispered, his voice barely audible, "Please don't leave me." Meredith's face twisted with rage. "I own this house. I'm Richard's wife. When he dies, I'll own everything," she snarled, throwing her wine glass across the room. It shattered with a sickening sound, the red liquid soaring toward them. Elena moved in front of Harold. The glass exploded against her arm, her body absorbing the pain, her breath catching. And then, from the far corridor, Richard Whitmore entered. His father was sobbing, the maid was bleeding, and his wife, she was smiling.
"Helena, what happened?" Richard's voice cut through the silence like a sword. His footsteps echoed as he stepped further into the room, his polished shoes splashing through drops of wine and blood on the marble floor. Meredith's eyes locked onto him, a venomous smirk twisting her lips. Her hand trembled, still clutching the glass she had just thrown. "Oh, thank God you're here, Richard." Meredith's voice was a performance. It was sharp, false, dripping with calculated sincerity. "She attacked him." She gestured wildly toward Elena. "Your father, she hurt him. Look at the blood." Elena, pale and stunned, pressed her sleeve against her bleeding arm, attempting to stem the flow of crimson. Her breath trembled, but she stood her ground. "That's not true," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She threw the glass. I protected him." Meredith stepped forward, her face twisted with fury. "Liar!" she hissed, eyes blazing. "You're always manipulating him, sticking around him like a shadow, waiting for your chance." Richard's gaze shifted between Meredith, Elena, and his father, who sat trembling behind the maid. His frail Harold Whitmore, his eyes filled with sorrow and confusion, looked at Richard with a silent plea. His fingers trembled as he weakly pointed toward Elena. "She saved me," he whispered, his voice faint and fragile, as if it was a great effort just to speak. Meredith immediately tried to twist the moment. "He's confused," she sneered. "He doesn't know what he's saying. She's just manipulating you, Richard." Richard's jaw clenched as he looked between his father's fading form and Elena's bloodied arm. His mind was reeling, unsure who to believe. I need space," he muttered, backing away. "Elena, please, just leave the room." Elena's face crumpled. Tears welled in her eyes, but she said nothing as she cradled her arm and stepped out of the room. Her footsteps echoed down the hall, each step a painful reminder of the injustice she was enduring. The door closed with a soft click behind her, and Richard's heart clenched. The weight of his father's eyes haunted him, as if pleading for him to see the truth, a truth Richard wasn't ready to acknowledge. That night, the Whitmore estate felt colder than ever. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside. Elena's name was passed between the staff like a curse. Whispers rippled through the corridors, skepticism clouding every conversation. Elena sat alone in the servants' quarters, her arm wrapped in gauze, the sting of the wound almost insignificant compared to the wound in her soul. Her phone buzzed incessantly, a message from her sister in Atlanta. "How's Mom?" it read. But Elena had no answers. Her job was hanging by a thread, her future uncertain. Meanwhile, upstairs in the master suite, Meredith lay curled against Richard, her breathing steady, the faintest of smiles playing on her lips. She had won. "Honey," she murmured, "she needs to go. She can't stay in this house. We can't have staff like her making threats, manipulating you." Richard said nothing, his mind spinning. His eyes kept flashing back to his father's feeble hand pointing at Elena and the blood on her arm. The next morning, Richard summoned Elena to his study. She entered slowly, her body stiff with fear and exhaustion.
"Elena," Richard said, avoiding her gaze. His voice was cold. "You've crossed the line. I don't know exactly what happened, but there's too much confusion here, too much risk." Elena's voice cracked, but she held firm. "Mr. Whitmore, I would never hurt him." Richard raised a hand, silencing her. "Enough. You're dismissed. Effective immediately." Her world shattered in an instant. She nodded, barely able to look him in the eye. "Tell him goodbye for me," she whispered before turning and walking away. As the front door clicked shut behind her, Harold's weak voice called out, "Elena?" But there was no reply, only silence thick with unsaid truths. Richard stood alone in the mansion's security room later that night, bathed in the blue glow of the surveillance monitors. The footage flickered silently across the screen, showing what had transpired earlier that day. Richard scrolled back, heart pounding as he watched the scene again and again. There it was, Meredith's arm in mid-swing, hurling the wineglass at them, and Elena shielding his father. The glass exploded against her arm, the blood blooming across her skin. Richard froze the frame, his hands trembling. Meredith's lies, her manipulation, the truth Elena had tried to tell him, had tried to protect him from, was now undeniable. His face drained of color as he watched the scene again. He had made a terrible mistake. He had believed Meredith, and now Elena, the woman who had protected his father, was cast aside. "I was wrong," Richard whispered to himself. He ran a hand through his hair, guilt surging through him like a tidal wave. He leaned on the console, feeling as though he might collapse under the weight of his shame. Down the hall, Harold sat by the window, wrapped in a shawl, his expression distant. When Richard entered the room, Harold turned slowly to face him. "I saw the footage," Richard said, his voice thick with regret. "She protected you." Harold's lips trembled. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I begged you to see her, Richard. I begged you."
Richard knelt beside his father, feeling a deep sorrow wash over him. "I see her now," he murmured. "But I need to fix this. I need to make it right." Harold's voice cracked with emotion. "Then go find her before it's too late." Later that evening, Richard's Maserati pulled into a modest diner in East Hollywood, and there, sitting alone in a booth by the window, was Elena. Her arms were still wrapped, and her face was turned toward the rain. Richard's shadow fell across her table. She looked up, stunned, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. "Elena," Richard whispered, his voice filled with regret. "I don't work for you anymore, Mr. Whitmore," she replied, her voice steady but cold. Richard slid into the booth across from her. "Then let me speak to you," he said, his tone soft. "Not as your employer, but as a man who failed you."
Elena's lips trembled, but she remained silent. The only sound was the dull clink of her spoon against the mug. "I saw everything," Richard continued. "The cameras, they captured it all. I was wrong. I should have believed you." Elena's eyes welled up with tears. "That's not something you can take back, Mr. Whitmore." Richard nodded, guilt and remorse flooding through him. "I know," he said quietly, "but I can start making it right." He reached into his coat pocket and slid an envelope across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "A new contract. Full reinstatement. Triple salary. Private medical coverage for your mother in Atlanta. And you'll have your own suite near my father's room." Elena blinked hard, the tension in her shoulders evident. "Why now?" she asked, voice trembling. "Out of guilt?" Richard shook his head. "No, because my father trusts you, and because I finally understand why." She paused, her gaze hardening. "You don't know everything." Richard leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "Then tell me." Elena shook her head slowly. "There are things about your father, about your family that you don't know." Richard studied her, a deep feeling stirring inside him. "What do you mean?" "I can't say," Elena whispered, her voice strained. "Not here, not yet." Elena stood slowly, the contract still in her hands. She didn't look at Richard as she spoke, her voice steady yet faintly trembling with emotion. "I'll come back," she said, her words clear and unwavering. "But you're not ready to hear the rest yet." Richard watched her for a long moment, his heart torn in two. The weight of what had happened, the truth he wasn't ready to face, was suffocating. As Elena turned to leave the diner, Richard's voice broke the silence, soft but urgent. "Will I ever be?" Elena paused just long enough to answer without turning back. "You will be when the truth is ready." Richard was left in the dim light of the diner, alone with his thoughts. He watched her go, her figure disappearing into the night as rain tapped softly against the window. He could feel a deep unease stirring in his chest. Was he really ready for what Elena was holding back? Or would it shatter everything he thought he knew about his family?
The next morning, sunlight poured over the Whitmore estate, the golden rays casting a warm glow across the sprawling mansion. But inside, something had shifted, something deeper than the weather outside. Elena stepped through the grand entrance, not as the maid she had once been, but now as Harold Whitmore's official caregiver. Her appearance in the mansion was a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. Her black coat seemed out of place against the expensive marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and her presence was met with silent stares. The staff, once familiar and friendly, now regarded her with mixed emotions. Some avoided her gaze, others shot questioning glances, but there were no words of welcome. "She's back," a butler whispered under his breath, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I thought she was fired." "Meredith won't like this," another voice murmured as Elena passed by, her footsteps echoing through the grand hallway. Her heart tightened, but she kept her head high, walking with a determination that surprised even her. But Meredith was gone. Richard had made it clear to the entire household that his wife had left indefinitely and would not be returning. Some of the staff, however, couldn't hide their distaste, their eyes following Elena as she moved through the halls, her every step a reminder of the drama that had unfolded. Yet, in the sea of cold stares and judgment, there was one person who gave her a small, reassuring smile. It was Natalie, a quiet dishwasher who had always been kind to her. As Elena passed, Natalie gave her a subtle nod of support, an unspoken gesture of solidarity. Elena nodded back, grateful for this simple kindness in the face of everything she had been through.
When Elena reached Harold's room, she found him sitting upright in his bed, waiting for her. His eyes lit up when he saw her, a small but genuine smile spreading across his face. It was a smile that touched Elena deeply, more than anything else she had received that day. She crossed the room, moving toward him with quiet confidence. "Elena," Harold whispered, his voice weak but filled with affection. His tired gray eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade into the background. "I told you I'd come back," she said softly, her words carrying more weight than she had anticipated. She took his hand gently, holding it as if she were cradling something fragile, something precious. Harold's fingers tightened around hers, his grip weak but meaningful. "I never doubted it, not for a second," Harold replied, his voice filled with sincerity, tears brimming in his eyes. The truth in his words made Elena's heart ache. She had never realized how much this man had come to rely on her, how deeply he trusted her. Later that afternoon, as Elena passed through the hallway on her way to the kitchen, the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations in the corridors stilled as she walked by. A hushed silence followed her, and some of the staff exchanged looks, their whispers rippling through the air like a secret tide. One maid, a woman known for her sharp tongue, sneered just loud enough for Elena to hear. "Sleeping your way into promotion now, huh?"
Elena paused but didn't respond. She simply continued walking, her back straight, her heart heavy but determined. It wasn't the first time she had heard such whispers, and she doubted it would be the last. But this time, something in her had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had been dismissed, scorned, and cast aside. She was stronger now, resolute in her path, no matter the whispers behind her back. Another voice followed. "It's not over, you know. Not with her gone. Someone else will want her place." Elena didn't react. She didn't need to. She had learned long ago that gossip was a poison meant to weaken the ones who listened to it, and she would not be one of them. That night, as she helped Harold into bed, he looked at her with an expression of quiet wisdom. "You'll need thicker skin than you ever imagined," he said, his voice soft but filled with truth. "They'll come for you. The whispers won't stop, but you've got to hold your ground." Elena smiled faintly, her heart warmed by his words. "I've survived worse," she replied, her voice calm but resolute. Harold smiled weakly, his eyes glistening with tears. "You've held worse, too," he said gently, his voice almost a whisper. "Don't carry this one forever. Don't let it weigh you down." But Elena didn't respond. The worst burden was still buried deep inside her, a secret she had promised to keep, a truth that could destroy everything she was learning to trust. It was a secret she could never share with Harold, not yet. But as time went on, she knew that the weight of it would be harder to bear. 3 days after Elena's return, things at the Whitmore estate began to settle, but the silence beneath the surface only seemed to grow louder. Richard kept his distance, watching Elena from afar. She moved through the house with a quiet grace, carrying not just trays and medications, but the heavy burden of history. Her history, Harold's history, and the secrets she kept locked inside. Gasps rippled through the room as Richard turned to face the staff. His voice was steady but firm. "I've updated the estate documents. Should anything happen to me, Elena will take charge of my father's care, oversee this estate's moral integrity, and help expand the Whitmore Foundation." He looked into the eyes of each staff member, his gaze unflinching. "If anyone disrespects her or questions her place here, you answer to me."
A stunned silence filled the room. Elena blinked, her lips trembling with a mix of emotions. Later, in Harold's room, she stood by the window when Richard entered, holding a sealed envelope. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Richard's face softened. "My father added your name to the Foundation's future board. You helped carry his legacy when we didn't deserve you." Elena opened the envelope, revealing a check for $2 million. Tears welled up in her eyes as she gazed at the amount. "I don't need this," she whispered. Richard smiled gently. "You earned it, not for what you did, but for what you endured." She walked over to Harold, who reached for her hand with a quiet smile. "You're home now, soldier," he said softly. And for the first time in years, the Whitmore estate felt warm again. Not because of wealth or power, but because truth finally had a place at the table. If this story moved you, if you believe that truth, loyalty, and quiet sacrifice deserve to be celebrated, then please like this video and share it with someone who still believes in standing up for what's right, even when no one is watching. Sometimes, the ones we overlook carry the greatest truths.